Hello, this is Hector Vladimir. Today is September the 6th, 2016. It is a Tuesday morning. Temperature is cooling. Summer temperatures are fast disappearing, although it is still warm and not cold at all. Today I want to discuss batteries and a little bit about solar panel and battery hookup or connection or wiring. First, batteries. Batteries are the lifeblood, are the food storage of any off-grid installation, of any off-grid application. Without batteries, and I'm talking about electrical applications here, electrically speaking, without batteries, you basically cannot be off the grid. Batteries are the technologies, are what allow you to store energy for later use, just as your body stores energy in the form of fat, in the form of sugars for later use. Batteries store energy for later use, perhaps when there is not a source to tap into, source of energy, that is electric energy. Batteries are again the storage technologies, devices used to collect and store and use electrical energy, electrical power. How does this happen? In simple terms, before I go into any details, batteries work in this way. They store electrons, which are the many atoms that push electric charge, electric force, electric flow, that create an electric flow. Electrons are the units that can be measured as an electric charge within a battery. So the more electrons a battery has, the more charge or potential it has. For example, when you see a battery that says 100 amp hours, that means it has been measured to have more or less 100 hours if you drained that battery at 1 amp per second. If you had a device running on 12 volts and 1 amp, that would be the rating of that device, that load or that appliance, electronic equipment. For example, if it said 12 volt DC 1 amp rating, that would mean that if you had a 12 volt battery that said 100 amp hours, in theory that battery would last 100 hours powering that device. Of course, this is in theory, this is a rating. It is not by any means what would happen in actuality. It may be a lot less, it may be 50 hours, it may be 80, it may be 75. Depending on the amount of energy that's wasted, the efficiency of the electronic equipment, the efficiency of the battery, the temperature conditions. There's a bunch of factors that could play into how well a battery performs and how long you can use it for and how much power you can get from it. Batteries are a very, very important part of any getting off the grid application. Off-gridders, preppers, anyone attempting to be independent from a power grid would need batteries. There are tons of different types of batteries, different brands, different makers, manufacturers, different technologies. We'll try to discuss some of those, at least the most popular here. The most popular batteries are the 12 volt batteries, only because of vehicles. Vehicles use 12 volt batteries. When I say batteries, I'm talking about the rechargeable type. We'll focus on those, since to get off the grid you would want to very much to remain using rechargeable batteries. You don't want to use any kind of one-time use 12 volt batteries. Just to discuss or describe real quick how a wet cell 12 volt car battery works, it's a good jumping off point to explore some of the other technologies. Since the 12 volt wet cell battery, which is a car battery, probably the ones people use the most to get off the grid. Not necessarily your car battery, but something very similar, what they call a trolling battery or deep cycle battery, which is very much the same as your car battery. They're only constructed slightly different because of their two different uses, two different applications. First, the car battery is made to give you a very quick, very rapid discharge in amperage. So it's constructed a lot different, not too much, but slightly different when it comes to the way it is made on the inside. For this purpose, because it is constructed to discharge a lot of amps all at once. That's why a lot of them have ratings of 400 cold cranking amps. They have usually two ratings: cold cranking amps and cranking amps, or hot cranking amps. Cold cranking amps, which is basically the number that you want to go for, because most engines have been idle before you try to crank your vehicle or start up that engine. The other rating, which is the regular amps, are always a bit higher for the most part generally, but you want to go based on the cold cranking amps, which is your first time of the day startup of that vehicle. You want to rely on the amps available on that battery to start that engine. Many vehicles have different requirements for the amount of amps the engine requires. A lot has to do with the size of the engine, the size of the starting motor or the starter. You want to make sure you size your battery according to the cold cranking amps rated or listed on that battery. The car battery is built, manufactured differently from what we call a deep cycle battery. Off-grid applications, for the most part, use the deep cycle batteries. Marine batteries are generally deep cycle batteries. Trolling batteries. The difference between a deep cycle battery and a car battery, regular car or vehicle battery, is that the deep cycle batteries are built to be discharged a lot more. Thus the word deep. They could deep discharge, and they can also withstand a lot more of the discharge and charging cycles, from almost no charge to full, and then back down to zero, and then filled up again or charged fully again. They're built so they can last a lot longer and take the discharging and charging cycles that a off-grid utility or off-grid application would impose on that battery. That is a lot of stress for the materials, the chemicals within the battery. They have to be built a bit sturdier, beefier, more substantial. And that's the main differences between a deep cycle battery, which has beefier lead plates. Those are thicker generally than the car batteries that does not require the deep cycles of charge and discharge. You pretty much keep a car battery charged pretty much all the time. The alternator in your vehicle keeps the battery charged almost to its fullest, and if you leave your vehicle off for some time, it's usually not long enough for that battery to discharge enough for it not to be able to be used or not to have enough charge. Sometimes when the battery is a bit older and you don't start your vehicle for a few days, 2-3 days, you would notice a hesitation in the starting of that vehicle, or sometimes even it won't start at all because the battery does discharge on its own over a period of time. Again, the older the battery, the more this would happen. That battery may not be fully discharged, but it just may not have the amount of cranking amps that would be required to turn that motor, electrical motor, that would turn that engine, mechanical engine. Deep cycle batteries, I highly recommend you get those for any kind of off-grid application. There are other types that are much better and much more efficient when it comes to getting off the grid. They are much more expensive and difficult to acquire. So I will describe deep cycle wet cell batteries first. Those are probably your cheapest option and also your most readily available option. Easy to find locally, easy to find at your auto parts store, local super center, chain store, automobile section. More likely than not, we'll find marine batteries of various sizes, which are your deep cycle or trolling batteries. The quality of the battery is critical. It does generally determine how long a battery will last and how efficient that battery will be. So make sure you pay attention to manufacturer model, the price of the battery, the reputation of the manufacturer, and the battery model itself. So make sure you pay attention to those details when purchasing or acquiring a battery or battery bank. The way a wet cell battery works is by chemical reaction that take place within the battery. The wet cell, as its name suggests, is flooded in a chemical solution, usually water and sulfuric acid. This chemical solution provides the means for the materials within the battery to have a chemical reaction,
which provides the electrical path for electrons to flow,
or electric charge.
This path is necessary so that the battery's plates
provide an electrical potential difference within the battery that provides an electromotive force within the battery. Electromotive potential. a difference between the two poles, negative and positive. Difference enough. If you do hook up a circuit to those poles, it will create flow, electrical flow, a flow of electrons, thus create current to power other circuits, which may power mechanical devices, other electronic devices, other appliances, equipment, gadgets, etc. Electric flow, there are various theories out there, but for the most part, we accept the one where electric flow is from the negative pole to the positive pole. That's the most popular way of looking at electricity out there. Of course, that would be the flow of electrons from one pole to the other, from negative to positive. More or less following the law of magnetism that accepts flow from south to north pole, we go from negative to positive on the electron theory. Batteries, again, are flooded with water and sulfuric acid. There's a ratio there. When a battery is fully charged, it has a maximum amount of sulfuric acid and a minimum amount of water. So sulfuric acid is more abundant than water within that cell. That is when it's fully charged, a ready to go new battery or fully charged battery. That is the electrolyte. That liquid that I just mentioned, the water and the sulfuric acid, that combination is called the electrolyte. That is what allows the chemical reaction to occur within the battery and, of course, charge or discharge the battery. Thus provide power from the battery and also accept charge from another source into the battery. Also, there's a negative plate and a positive plate. These are the parts of the battery that are each hooked up to each pole, negative and positive. Of course, the negative plate is hooked to the negative pole, positive plate is hooked to the positive pole. And the negative pole is usually made up of a material called sponge lead. It's a type of lead. And the positive plate is made of lead oxide. And once the battery is discharging, for example, if you hook it up to a circuit load, with a load like a light, like a radio, TV, laptop charger, any kind of device that creates a load, a circuit that has a load, you connect it to this battery through the positive and negative plates or poles. You are in fact discharging the battery. And what's going on when you are discharging that battery inside? Well, the electrolytes begins to change. The liquid begins to change within the battery. The sulfuric acid begins to decrease and the water begins to increase. It is just a chemical reaction that's a bit complex to explain. There are formulas that can help you understand what happens when this is going on, when the battery is getting discharged. Basically, the electrons from the negative plate are en masse leaving that negative plate and going through the circuit and entering the positive plate. But for this to happen, the electrolyte changes. The sulfuric acid decreases, the water increases. Also, the plates change. The plates themselves, the material in that plate change. The negative plate, the sponge lead, decreases. All around it, another chemical reaction occurs. Lead sulfate increases within that material. So there's a molecular change going on within the sponge lead. The sponge lead decreases while the lead sulfate all around that increases. At the same time this is going on, remember, we're now discharging this battery. The positive plate, the lead oxide, is also decreasing. And at the same time on that same plate, lead sulfate is increasing. So when the battery is discharging, both of the plates are changing. Both of the different types of leads are changing. They're decreasing in their original material. Another type of lead, lead sulfate, is basically replacing these types of materials in each of the plates. And this is while the battery is discharging. Again, all being made possible by the electrolyte or the chemical within that battery. When the battery is fully discharged, all the electrons, or most of the electrons, have been
transferred.
The battery is fully discharged. The electrolyte has changed as much as it can, as well as the plates within the battery. They cannot change anymore since there's not much of a chemical reaction left to occur, because the electrons that allow this chemical reaction to occur
have been transferred.
They are no longer abundant enough. It stops. The reaction stops or slows down substantially to where the battery cannot be used. The sulfuric acid is at a minimum and the water is at a maximum. So the solution is very watered down. The sponge lead is at its minimum and the lead sulfate is at maximum on the negative plate. On the positive plate, the lead dioxide is at its minimum also, and lead sulfate is also at its maximum. So the composition of each of the plates is depleted, water is maxed out, and the sulfuric acid is at its minimum. So no chemical reaction of any use is occurring at the battery at this time. Now you can go ahead and reverse the process within lead acid batteries or your regular car or deep cycle battery, and you can inject or push electrons back into the battery. When this happens, the reverse reaction occurs. This is all happening chemically, and the electrolyte begins to increase sulfuric acid and water is decreased. This is a chemical reaction again that's quite complex to explain. When the battery is charging, the negative plates and the positive are changing as well. The sponge lead increases while the lead sulfate decreases, while at the same time in the positive plate the lead dioxide increases while the lead sulfate decreases. And that is basically how a charge-discharge cycle occurs within a deep cycle battery or a wet cell battery, which again works by chemical action. Batteries again are very important, a critical part of any plans to get off the grid. Of course, as a way to store energy, to use energy from solar, wind, or any other type of source of alternative renewable energy, whether it be from the sun, from some sort of device producing electricity for charge, that is. There are various types of batteries. We just went into a bit depth when it comes to the wet cell battery or chemical battery. We explained that with some detail. I won't go into details of many of the other types. I will leave those to you to research. There are two types of cells, primary cells and secondary cells. Primary cells are throwaway batteries. In other words, the chemical reaction within the batteries cannot be reversed or restarted, just as I explained for the chemical battery, where the chemical reaction is reversed by reversing the direction of charge, direction of current. However, many of the batteries out there, the primary cells, are not rechargeable. Those are your common batteries, the ones that you buy at the store, your Rayovac, Duracell, Energizer, other type of batteries. There are many brands out there, and they're for the most part the AA's, AAA's, DC size batteries. They're for the most part throwaway. A few are rechargeable nowadays. They have become a lot more popular in the last 10 years or so. However, most of them are throwaway batteries. They are divided into many categories within the primary cells, within the throwaway types. Some of them are zinc carbon cells, which are the dry cells. Zinc and carbon are very popular materials, elements that can be used to build your own batteries, whether it be for experiments, for any type of application you may have, custom built application, any kind of customized battery. You can build it with a carbon rod. For the most part, they come as rods. Zinc, a small zinc plate or as big as you need it. Also, you would need an acid water solution, combination of the two, and of course a container to install or place the materials in the solution, the container. Of course, you would have to run wiring. The two materials, the carbon and the zinc. The carbon would be your anode, the zinc would be your cathode. Cathode would be your negative, anode would be your positive. Carbon zinc cells are pretty popular, more popular in the experimental educational arena because they require that liquid solution that it's hard to contain, move around, move about. It's usually stationary. Can move it around as much as you can the dry cell type batteries. Alkaline cells are a very popular type of battery. You may have heard the word alkaline battery in commercials, descriptions for battery types. A lot of your AA, AAA, C and D size batteries are alkaline batteries. Again, those are pretty popular because they are what we call dry cells, meaning they do not have any kind of liquid or watery solution that may leak, that may cause any kind of mess. They use for the most part a paste instead of the liquid solution. The paste does have moisture, but it's far less than very liquid solution like acid and water. A paste has a minute amount of water, and it's basically mixed in very good with the solid portion of the solution of what would be the electrolytes or the medium where the chemical reaction would occur. Of course, this medium is for the most part in contact with both of the charged materials, which are the cathode and the anode, or the two plates, the positive and negative. Mercury cells, it's also a relatively dry type of cell. It's a more or less new type of cell that is not as popular as many of the others. They may be found in very specific or specialized applications. Lithium cell. The lithium cell is probably one of the most popular types of batteries among the tool industry and many other types of industry, including toys now with drones or quadcopters. Many of the rechargeable gadgets and technology of today, which are very popular, like cell phones, MP3 devices, any type of handheld device, especially cell phone devices, which are probably more popular by a number of magnitudes than any other handheld device nowadays, use rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. Cameras are quickly becoming a thing of the past. However, a lot of them do use rechargeable batteries. Many don't. Anything that's really small that is rechargeable very likely has some sort of lithium type battery within. So those are very, very popular batteries. And that is because lithium has the highest negative potential of all metals, meaning that they can be negatively charged and they hold that charge very well, very efficient. They are also, another thing that makes it very attractive as a battery material component is its weight. Lithium is very lightweight, allowing for lighter weight batteries, thus smaller, thus more convenient electronics devices, etc. They have other types of primary cell batteries, which are the common throwaway batteries. Yes, they do have lithium ions that are throwaway as well, and they also have them rechargeable. Most of the ones out there are rechargeable. The throwaway batteries are usually the ones that come in your common sizes, such as AA, AAAs, C, D batteries, etc. Silver oxide batteries are also another type of primary cell throwaway batteries. The silver oxide batteries are very long lasting for low consumption devices or low voltage amperage consumption requirement devices, such as hearing aids, perhaps the pacemakers, perhaps many of the devices that are implanted would take such batteries. Watches, the quartz mechanism and circuitry that requires very little electricity or charge to operate. Things that require very little charge that could be amplified usually have or require or can use silver oxide cells. There are also a couple of other types of batteries in the secondary cell category, the rechargeable category. Of course, your good old lead acid battery, which is the one I described at the beginning of the show, the one with the chemical reaction that could be reversed for charging, thus making the battery a rechargeable battery or secondary cell. We have nickel cadmium cells that can be recharged. These batteries have a different construction than your primary cell alkaline batteries, different materials. They use nickel and cadmium, which can be recharged. They also have the nickel metal hydrate cell, which is a less common, more specialized to use type of cell battery. And with that, I will jump into battery connections, hook up wiring, which is a very important topic, very important part of your off-the-grid installation, off-the-grid application. If you use 12-volt batteries, you can use only 12-volt solar panels. Or if you use a windmill that's rated for 12 volts, a 12-volt system, you have to use 12-volt batteries. You don't really have to buy 12-volt batteries to have a 12-volt battery system. You could have a 24-volt system as well, DC, with 12-volt batteries. You can have a 48-volt system with 12-volt batteries. You have to have, of course, a series of batteries or a battery bank to make this happen. And this all can be done through different configurations or different types of connections, different ways to connect the batteries together. 12-volt batteries are the most common batteries out there, no questions about it. You can use 12-volt batteries to make a 24-volt system or a 24-volt battery
by connecting one positive and one negative pole from each of the batteries,
or connecting one negative pole to the other battery's positive pole. That is connecting the battery in series. Why in series? Because Your load, let's say on the negative side, comes into the negative pole of one battery, goes into the battery. This is the charge, the flow, the current that we're talking about. The definition of series is one path, one way for electric flow, for electric charge or electric current to travel. So if you only have one path, you have one way to go, and that is first through the negative pole of the battery. This is coming from the load into the battery, out the positive pole of that one battery. We have two batteries now. Into the negative pole of the next battery, battery number 2. Out of the battery from positive pole of the second battery, and from there it goes to the positive connection of your load, whether it be a light, whether it be a speaker, heater, whatever it may be. That is why we call it in series, connected in series. You can have two batteries, whether it be two 12-volt batteries to make a 24-volt system. You can have two 6-volt batteries connected in series to make a 12-volt battery. You could have two 24-volt batteries connected in series to make a 48. When you connect batteries in series, you add the voltages. So if you have two 6-volt batteries, you add the voltages, 12 volts connected in series. However, the amperage does not double. The amperage remains the same. So if you have two 12-volt batteries, you want to hook them up together, make 24 volts. If each of those batteries is 110 amp hours rating, the amp hours do not double. They do not add. They remain the same. You will still get 110 amp hours from the 24-volt batteries you just made from two of the 12-volt batteries. So your voltages add, your currents remain the same. And this is part of Ohm's law and other laws, electrical laws, that piggyback on Ohm's law, that deal with series connections or series circuits, another word for connections, and parallel circuits and combination circuits, which are simply parallel and series both together. So you can get different voltages from different configurations using multiple batteries. A 12-volt system can also be made a lot more durable as far as the charge goes. The charge within the batteries could be made a lot bigger, could be made to last a lot longer, electrically more capable by connecting a battery bank, multiple batteries, connecting them in parallel. An electrical law for parallel circuits or parallel wiring states that when you connect circuits or circuit components such as batteries in parallel, the voltages remain the same and the current adds. The voltages remain the same when you connect batteries in parallel. Connecting a battery in parallel is simply connecting each of the poles with its respective polarity, negative to negative, positive to positive, from each battery to another. It could be 2 batteries, 3 batteries, 4 batteries, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on. This is a parallel connection. And again, when you connect batteries in parallel or any other type of voltage producing device, whether it be a generator, solar panels, whatever it may be that's producing power, any kind of power source, the voltages from those sources will remain the same. However, the current will add, meaning that in a battery, the current is basically the amount of charge that that battery can hold for a certain amount of time using a certain amount of load or connected to a certain load with a closed circuit, of course, meaning that it's being discharged. When you connect batteries, for example, two 12-volt batteries in parallel, positive to positive, negative to negative, you are in fact making that 12-volt battery twice as durable or twice as capable to hold and disperse charge. So if that battery lasted you, for example, 1 hour running, let's say a laptop, two 12-volt batteries wired in parallel will last you, in theory, 2 hours running that one laptop. Again, you have to look at your amp hours rating on the battery. More or less take about 80% of that, and that will be, in actuality, more or less that will be your time available drawing however many amps you may draw with your load. If you have 100, for example, 100 amp hours to make it even, a number that's easy to work with, 100 amp hours means 100 hours drawing 1 amp. That would be, in theory, the capacity, capability of that battery. In actuality, it's more like 75 to 80% of that, which is about 45 to 50 minutes out of the hour. So if you were to take another battery, add it to that in parallel, you would be doubling those 45 minutes, making them into 90 minutes. That is if you draw the 1 amp per, that's 1 amp per second in actuality. So as long as you're drawing 1 amp per second, you can get about 90 minutes out of those two batteries. And the more batteries you hook up, the more time you will have to run that load, whatever it may be, a laptop, charger, a light, whatever it may be. So hooking them up in parallel is a way to make the system longer lasting and able to provide longer periods of charge for whatever the load you may be using. That's why it's somewhat important to calculate, to plan your power usage when you're off the grid. When you're off the grid, every amp hour you can collect is very precious and very valuable. And that's why you have to plan out how you're going to spend that energy and plan out what your exact requirements are, so you don't spend more money than you have to, so you don't run out of energy and power without you finishing the work, or you running out of power and being put in a situation that's either inconvenient and even hazardous. So planning, doing the math, and mapping out exactly how much energy you will be needing, it is a very, very important and recommended step for anyone trying to get off the grid as far as energy consumption goes, electrical energy. Break out your basic electronics and electricity book or website and review those few laws, Ohm's law, Kirchhoff's law, Watt's law, and you'll find it very, very convenient and very, very helpful with your planning and with your overall use of electrical renewable energy and renewable equipment such as solar. So again, you can use different voltage batteries to make different voltage settings or different voltage systems, battery banks. A battery bank is nothing but a collection of batteries connected in however fashion is needed for your system to work properly. You could have 6-volt batteries and still have a 48-volt system. You could have 12-volt batteries and have a 12-volt system, or a 24-volt system, or a 48-volt system and up. You cannot really go down the voltage without very expensive and intricate and involved equipment. For example, you can't go down to a 6-volt system for whatever reason from 12-volt batteries. You have to start with 6-volt batteries to have a 6-volt system. You can, however, go up. For example, if you have 6-volt batteries, several of them, you can make a 12-volt, 48-volt and up system. So you cannot go down. You can only go up as far as voltage. You can either remain the same or go up. You cannot go down with your amp hours. Your amp hours can either remain the same and your voltage goes up by connecting your batteries in series, or you can decide to keep your voltage the same and have your amp hours go up by connecting your batteries in parallel. I do recommend 24-volt systems for higher power use requirements, applications, higher power consumption, such as big household appliances, washing machines, dishwashers, microwaves, coffee makers, rice pots, stuff like that. You use quite a bit of energy, draw quite a bit of amps. Power tools, you want to have enough juice in there to kickstart and keep going with those appliances. And you want to waste as little energy as possible. In other words, be as efficient as you can be. That will save you time and money and efforts in the long run. Batteries, again, are a critical part of getting off the grid. It's the only way you will be able to use energy at night from solar, wind, or any kind of other renewable power source. And I say at night because that's when your sun is not present, sunlight. Your wind is usually not as high or pronounced. And in either case, you can hardly ever use electric charge straight from those sources. You have to have a medium to store the energy, collect the energy, which is, for the most part, is the batteries. Not only because it's a source to collect energy and then use it from there, but it's also a steady source of electricity. It doesn't vary as much as your solar panels output would. It doesn't vary as much as the wind. You don't want to have, for example, your light varying current depending on how much sunlight your solar panel is getting outside. There could be a cloud passing through. There could be shadow from trees or other objects hit that solar panel. So, of course, your output will dim that light or any other electrical device you may be running. Also, when there's no power source available, you can use the energy stored in the battery. Like if you get a couple of days worth of sun, you're not at home or you're not using the system, that energy, it doesn't have to be wasted. It doesn't have to be just ignored or bypassed or just omitted. It could be collected. It could be saved for later use. That's probably one of the most advantageous features of batteries. It could be used as a storage unit for energy. Also, I'd like to tackle this issue now about connecting solar panels. Solar panels can be connected in series and parallel just like you can with batteries. They are a power source just like batteries are. They could be wired exactly in the same manner,
with the exception that solar panel connections or poles need to be combined. For example, 4 solar panel positive cables need to be combined or connected into one point, and the 4 negative cables need to be combined or connected in another isolated point, separated from and not connected to the positive.
and the output is exactly the same as I just explained. In parallel would be positive to positive, negative to negative, like poles connected to each other. You would get basically the same voltage, keep the same voltage as one panel would be. If you have 12-volt panels connected in parallel, you would keep the same voltage and add the current. So you would basically have a lot more current depending how many panels you put in, same amount of voltage. This is recommended for off-grid systems, or a requirement in many cases for off-grid systems, meaning if you're going to charge a battery, you want to keep the solar panel system the same voltage rating as your battery bank. So if you have a 12-volt battery system or bank, you have to have a 12-volt solar panel system. It doesn't matter how many panels you hook up together as long as you use the right battery charger. Well, you could have 20 12-volt panels hooked up to one battery, although that may be an overkill in most applications, most instances. But you can keep the same voltage by hooking up the panels in parallel. If you go with on-grid or grid-tied system,
you generally want to get a higher voltage, such as 150, 160, or 170 volts.
And keep your amperage or your current the same, lower. That way you can deliver high voltage, low amperage to synchronize with your higher voltage, lower amperage grid system, which could be 120 to 240 going into your household.
This exact voltage will be dictated by your inverter's requirements. So read the manual for your grid-tied inverter to see what the maximum voltage is for your solar panel array, and you want to keep it below that voltage when doing your connections.
With your grid-tied inverter, of course, basically your solar array, the collection of solar panels, must be connected in a way that match your battery voltage. If you have a 24-volt battery bank, you have to have a 24-volt connection with your solar panels. If you have bigger panels, for example, 200 and up watts for your panels, they are generally 24-volt panels to begin with. And you want to have a 24-volt battery bank by hooking up, for example, 2 12-volt batteries together in series. And of course, if you're going to have 4 12-volt batteries as a 24-volt system, you have to have 2 pairs, for example, each pair hooked up in series. And then one pair is hooked up to the other pair in parallel. So you have to be careful not to connect all of the batteries in series. Otherwise, you'll have a 48-volt system with 2 pairs, and you may cause some problems. I do recommend you look at some of the wiring diagrams online. Wiring diagrams, wiring schematics for how to hook up solar panels and or batteries. You can also increase, like I just mentioned, your voltage and keep your current the same for panels, hooking them up in series, positive to negative, negative to positive. Basically daisy chained, and this adds up all the voltages together. You can end up with a very high voltage system that only requires a minute amount of current delivered to the grid-tied inverter. So again, pay attention to how you want your system connected, photovoltaic system, what you want to use it for, how much power you require, and what are the appliances or the systems or the machinery you will be running with that power. Will it be a bunch of low voltage electronics? Will it be high power, high consumption, high use machinery, steady power consumption? Will it be kick-starting a motor, a power tool, some sort of device that requires a sharp burst of current, such as, something like an old style television or an air conditioner that requires that kickstart, usually through the use of capacitors. Consider what you're going to be using your power for and perform your hookups, your wiring, your configuration according to that. If you're going to use it for low voltage, low requirement equipment, you may be all right with a 12-volt system that is hooked up in parallel to increase the time available for use of the system. If you're going to use power machinery or high voltage machinery, high voltage requirement equipment, motors, etc., you may want to go with a 24 or 48 volt system hooked up in series parallel or a combination connection. If you do a combination 24 volt, you have to hook up, if you have 12 volt batteries, battery pairs in series, and then each pair connected in parallel. That's to keep the current the same on each pair, and of course you want to double your voltage within each of the pairs. Just a quick description on off-grid inverters. Off-grid inverters are what the name describes. They're used away from the grid or non-dependent on the power grid. They're used with batteries, so they are a lot different than your grid-tied inverters. For the most part, they are cheaper, slightly. Good quality ones may not be as cheap, may not be that much different from grid-tied inverters as far as price. They're made up of a few technologies within them. Most basically the transformer, step up, step down transformers within. They step up your voltage through magnetic induction, usually 12 volts, your 24 volts, they step it up to usually 110 to 120 volt AC, at times to 220 to 240 AC as well. Of course, this is done through something called an oscillator and various other circuitry that make the AC signal smoother, more reliable, and give it that sine wave, more or less of a sine wave pattern to it. Some of them are pure sine wave inverters, DC to AC inverters, so they give you that pure shape, and this is mostly necessary for very sensitive equipment. I will leave it at that. I will stress the importance of battery and paying attention to how you connect to get off the grid, because that could make your loads you use on it, the life of the equipment, the life of the system, and also the amount of charge or efficiency you can get from the system. Pay attention to that, learn from it, learn about it, trial and error, and also through investigation and learning research. Look stuff up, look what other people and what they have found out, look what has been known for some time now. For example, basic electrical, those can be relied upon to build system custom. You may rely very heavily on known and established electrical principles. So again, this has been a audio recording describing batteries, different setups, different configurations for batteries and solar photovoltaic modules. This has been Hector Vladimir. I would hope to attract your attention once more in future shows. Thank you very much and have yourself a great rest of your day.